David, is this a good case?
If what Mr. Voskerichian, the neighbor, alleges is true, I think it's a pretty strong case. What he's alleging is that this house was worth $4.3 million or more, and that Mr. Zuckerberg wanted to buy the house, and what he ended up promising was $1.7 million as a cash payment or some sort of payment, along with promises to introduce him to his valuable social network, and that would be worth significant amounts of money. And if that promise was made, and if that promise was exchanged as part of this deal for purchasing Mr. Voskerichian's house, I think it definitely is a pretty strong case.
Talk to me about the law behind this. I mean, there's no written agreement from what I can understand. There's no formal contract of any kind.
Right, and that's a great question. We usually think of contracts as written documents, right? And in fact, there was a written document here. There was a document basically stating, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I'm sorry. Laptop went off for a second. Normally we think of written contracts, and here we had a written contract for the sale of the estate. And nowhere in that written document was there any mention of these promises from Mr. Zuckerberg. So you might think that that was enough to turn the tide in favor of Mr. Zuckerberg. But in fact, anybody who's taken even a few days of contracts law knows that oral promises can be just as good as written promises, and it's really just a matter of proving that they exist. California actually takes a very liberal approach, as you might suspect, with allowing oral promises to come into the written document. And so even though that's not within what they might call the four corners of the written document, if he can provide evidence that Mr. Zuckerberg made this promise and that promise was made in exchange for purchasing the home, then I think he will prevail. And so far, he's come up with some pretty good evidence that suggests that at least Zuckerberg made that promise.
Yeah, it's also interesting that Voskerichian, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he's sued. This isn't his first lawsuit. Does that matter here, if he's a particularly litigious person?
From a procedural or purely legal matter, no. But of course, juries take lots of things into account. And so at the end of the day, the juries might well look at the vicious tactics or the hard knocks tactics that are being used by Voskerichian, as well as his previous litigiousness, and maybe they might hold that against him. On the other hand, you might have juries looking at Mr. Zuckerberg and holding unfavorable opinions. So at the end of the day, you put 12 people on a panel, give them lots of time to discuss the matters, and who knows what verdict they come out with.
How could damages of potential business deals possibly be measured?
That's a great question, and that should and probably is one. It is going to be one of Zuckerberg's arguments that this particular promise is so indefinite that courts can't possibly enforce it. I think Voskerichian's attorneys have, however, found a way around that. I think it is difficult to measure these types of damages, but what they are asking for is not the value of the promises. What they're asking for is to rescind or undo this deal. Voskerichian will give back the $1.7 million plus interest, and he will receive the house back. Unwinding the deal is perfectly within the court's authority, and it would get around that problem of measuring the damages of what's the value of these promises or these introductions. And
it sounds like you really think this is a case Mark Zuckerberg is going to lose.
Based purely on what we've seen in the media and in the court filings, I'd say these following propositions. If everything that Voskerichian has alleged is true, he will probably prevail. Again, we don't know what might happen with the jury, but the law is probably on his side. Second, that we've had two pieces of evidence come out that seem to point to supporting his version of the facts. One today, or the New York Times just reported today, that Voskerichian's attorneys filed an affidavit on behalf of his real estate broker saying that he indeed have an offer of $4.3 million on this home. Given that he sold the home for $1.7 million, a very steep discount from that market price, if that offer actually was in existence, and we have some evidence now that it was, then that is one pretty strong data point that Mr. Voskerichian was exchanging this for something else of value, this promise potentially. And the second piece of evidence that's pretty damning against Mr. Zuckerberg is an email from one of his advisors in which they state that Zuckerberg did in fact make a promise to make some light introductions on behalf of Voskerichian. That email seems to indicate that Voskerichian's version of the facts may be true. And so taken together, I think that this tends to support his allegations.